Okay. It's fine. It's fine.
Welcome to AIDS Institute Grand Rounds on Monday. I'm Judy Currier from the Division of Infectious Diseases, and it's my honor and pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker today, Dr. Sanne from Johannesburg, University of Witwatersrand, and he has a lot of titles. He has just incredible landscape of activities related to HIV treatment, scale-up, implementation, evaluation. Started out, and he'll tell you a little bit about his background as an infectious disease doctor involved in HIV treatment and some early drug development, to running a huge PEPFAR program in South Africa, and now overseeing a consortium of African partners who are providing technical assistance to 18 different countries in the rollout of ARTs and HIV programs. And he's really been involved, I think, more than anybody I know, kind of in every aspect of HIV treatment, development, implementation, evaluation, and scale-up. So he's going to give you kind of an overview of where we are now and where things are going. And it's really a pleasure to work with Ian in the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, where he's the vice chair of the network and really leads the international sites, along with working with him in the EQUIP consortium. So Ian, welcome, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Judy. I hope the microphone's working. You'll tell me. There we go. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation. Tembi and I, together with John, who I think is back home, but Tembi and I are certainly honored to be here at UCLA and to increase or continue exploring how we can collaborate into the future. Thank you, Ashley. I think you were instrumental in organizing most of the travel and arrangements, etc. Certainly, it's great to be here. So, art, do or die. So that title is focused in terms of do or die as an imperative for us as clinicians to implement antiretroviral therapy and the related opportunistic infection treatments. Because we as clinicians, certainly in South Africa and in the late 90s, saw the impact of HIV/AIDS with incredible numbers of patients coming through, and in the era of no treatment, an incredible morbidity and mortality. And it was in that period, in my formative years, in 92 to 96, where I actually saw the advent of antiretroviral therapy coming about, and where I initiated first my research unit to try and access drugs through research for patients. I came into my career just after training as a physician, as an internist, at the time point that combination treatment was coming about, AZT3TC, and it was in the evolution of that treatment, where there were almost no clinicians in South Africa willing to work with HIV, where my bosses in the Department of Medicine actually thought that this was a dead-end career, and in fact they were encouraging me not to become involved. And so as I qualified as an internist, I became head of the HIV clinic, head of the unit, head of academia related to HIV. We did not have infectious diseases as a subspecialty, and so I was also head of infectious diseases until we imported Professor Smigo, who then took over head of ID and under whom I trained for my ID fellowship. So essentially, this is to acknowledge in 2003, the risk that the ACTG took on international sites. There were first 4. Today there are 25 in 13 countries. And in fact, I'm honored to be the international vice chair and to work with Judy on the ACTG. But it's really the interplay between clinical research and policy that became an emphasis for me over time. And it is it's been made possible through global collaborations and through the advent of PEPFAR to be able to have a clinical trials unit that is focused in phase 1 to 3 clinical research, being able to do post-clinical trial implementation sciences, to actually implement work, and then to evaluate it from a health economics and epidemiology perspective, with substantive funding from a number of agencies. I don't hold all of this funding, but colleagues within the group do, and it's all been made possible through serious support. I'd like to give one historic story, which I'll go through quickly, and that is following first a landmark victory in court on the use of patents for antiretroviral therapy in South Africa in 2001, where the Minister of Health basically pushed the pharmaceutical industry in a use it or lose it patent dispute. In other words, either they used their HIV drug patents for the benefits of the average South African, or they would lose their patent rights. The victory was actually a settlement in which the drug companies said, okay, well, we don't want to have this fight, so we'll agree to make the IP available for generic manufacture by South African generic manufacturers and Indian, which actually unraveled worldwide access to antiretroviral therapy, because with that victory, all drug prices worldwide came down. And it was that plus Nelson Mandela's personal intervention to overcome AIDS denialism, Thabo Mbeki's AIDS denialism. The evening before cabinet, he actually called, and we were partly involved in this. He actually called up every single cabinet minister and said to them, so what is your conscience? And you need to actually go to cabinet tomorrow and vote your conscience and speak up your mind to stop this nonsense with Thabo Mbeki. And he quoted his son's own death due to HIV as the reason why he had this imperative. And the cabinet, in fact, decided, or went around the room, and basically every single person voted their conscience, and Thabo Mbeki had no choice but to, in fact, initiate an HIV program. So these were the two regimens. We spent in my group the next 5 years arguing why those were not, that shouldn't be the correct regimens. And it was mainly the D drugs that actually caused substantive toxicity. But what was interesting was that every single one of these pieces of research work had no impact on the Department of Health choice for treatment until we actually, with health economics, could demonstrate to the Department of Health how they should, in fact, how it wasn't going to cost them any more money to actually change treatment regimens. And I'll quickly show you some of the data. So from the Thembelete Clinic cohort, we could actually demonstrate single drug substitution, that almost more than half of pregnant women could not tolerate D4T. That actually 38% of patients over a 3-year period had to switch away from D4T. That in fact AZT, which we don't use in first-line treatment any longer, had a better outcome than D4T in our workplace program. And in fact that over time, more than a quarter of patients in fact failed treatment due to on these D4T based regimens. And we published this data in a variety of journals and a variety of questions. We eventually published a modeling exercise in health economics and established a reserve price for tenofovir over D4T, which began the arguments on whether in fact the treatment could be replaced. In an interim step, we tried to demonstrate whether 30 milligrams of D4T could work, but we also, with a basic sciences PhD, demonstrated that actually the toxicities of D4T occurred almost immediately. Within just 2 weeks, mitochondrial changes in adipose tissue were occurring. In parallel, we established the 10-liter clinic cohort and showed that by using data systems therapy edge, we could actually reduce loss to follow-up. So this is a graphic of follow-up of patients, and it demonstrated really that as we introduced live electronic medical record systems linked to mHealth systems, we could reduce loss to follow-up. And today in Thembelete Clinic, if you are a South African with an ID number, with a social security number, then the missed clinic visit schedule rate is 4% and the loss to follow-up rate is 2%. We could demonstrate that, all of these highlighted ones I was supposed to fix the reference. This is all published. We did in fact show that earlier initiation of antiretroviral therapy was more likely to lead to success, and that in fact across the board, this is a graphic that Diane Havlier developed and we had in a JAMA paper, and really across the board there are phases of risk of developing tuberculosis in patients with HIV. South Africa having amongst the highest rates in the world, with 20% of all TB incidents occurring in South Africa, of worldwide TB incidents. There are different phases of risk of tuberculosis, and initiating antiretroviral therapy could in fact reduce the risk of TB. So what we did is we looked in the Thembelete Clinic cohort and in fact demonstrated exactly that. That as soon as antiretroviral therapy is initiated, the incident risk of tuberculosis is reduced. What about resistance? Through Wendy Stevens' group, we looked at drug resistance. You'll all know this graphic, that the longer we allow treatment to fail, the more likely there is to accumulate drug resistance. And so using our data systems, merging clinical data and resistance data, we were able to show time from clinical failure with viral load changes to the actual drug resistance testing. These therapy edge being the clinical system, virus score being the genotype testing system. We were able to show that in fact 85% of our patients failing treatment in whom we did resistance tests have got the regular mutations. So subtype C HIV is no different to B, and the incidence rates of drug resistance mutations and multiple within a single patient are quite high. For the NNRTI mutations, we saw very similar patterns to subtype B. What was interesting on the prior slide, which is one of the arguments that we have used, is that despite not using tenofovir, that there is an incidence of K65R in patients failing thymidine analogs, and therefore we argued that tenofovir should be utilized before D4T or AZT rather than the other way around. So we also looked at hepatitis B co-infection rates and demonstrated 4.8% surface antigen positivity and an additional 9.8% isolated core antibody positivity, and therefore discussing that tenofovir again would be a better drug to use in first-line antiretroviral therapy rather than stavudine. But it was the health economics that really brought to light through the quantitative analyses of the national guidelines, but utilizing outcome data from Thembelete Clinic cohort, we could show that in fact the average patient successfully treated as defined as alive with an undetectable viral load or an improvement in CD4 count of greater than 50 cells per year, that in fact the cost of treatment is in the range of $1,000 to $1,400 per patient year. What we discounted were patients who were lost or who had died. Unfortunately, a dead patient is an inexpensive patient from a treatment program perspective, and that reduction in cost was an offset that allowed the Treasury and Department of Health to agree that in fact an average cost of around $700 per patient year should be made available by Treasury. We then calculated up in terms of the treatment guidelines at that time. We were able to show that we could replace tenofovir with for D14, that we could go up in CD4 count, increasing the total number of patients treated, with an additional offset shifting treatment into primary care and with central procurement through the, at that time, CHI mechanisms. We eventually demonstrated that by changing the guidelines, although over a period to 2016, there would be an additional 233% of patients. The additional guidelines, taking it to 300 CD4 count 350, would add another 14%, and whereas going to the full 500 CD4 count would only add an additional another 10% of patients. So basically the Department of Health in 2 steps agreed to the CD4 count 500 threshold quite quickly. What's interesting now is that we've redone this work for test and start. And actually the recommendation to the Department of Health was that there was no additional value to, from a health economic perspective, to go test and start. The additional numbers of patients over a period out to 2030 is, in fact, is only an additional 17% of patients. And the current implementation of CD4 count 500 has not even met the actual the thresholds that we had anticipated. However, it's politically unacceptable to not go test and start. And so, in fact, the Department of Health has discounted our view on, from a health economic point of view, and has actually initiated test and start from September this year. So what about these improvements in CD4 count? Our cohort shows that the earlier you start, the better you are, and the more likely you are to actually have an improvement in immune reconstitution. Certainly the HPTN 052 study, which we participated in, has been critically important in re-emphasizing the benefits of antiretroviral therapy. The randomized study with either immediately initiated antiretroviral therapy or delayed based on CD4 count led to a reduction in HIV transmission in discordant couples of 90, I think the final publication actually is 92% reduction, but probably the most effective reduction in transmission or preventative methods that has been published to date. We have all of these facets together have re-emphasized an expanded antiretroviral therapy treatment program. I seem to have hidden the slide where I wanted to show you the data on the population level viral load in KZN that is now associated with a reduction in HIV incidence rates. So the better the coverage from antiretroviral therapy, the more the reduction in HIV transmission rates, incidence rates. So for my second theme, I'd like to move to some health systems interventions. And it is around differentiated models of care and expanded access of treatment that we focused in the CHRU program project grant on the differentiation. So this is again some old data, but we looked at nurse-provided antiretroviral therapy, and interestingly, just before this meeting, we were talking about whether we could shift hepatitis C treatment to a primary healthcare setting. And this particular study looked at randomized households into either immediate nurse-monitored treatment or doctor-monitored treatment. And in a cohort that mimicked the treatment guidelines at that time with a CD4 count threshold of 350 cells, and a variety of viral loads with a variety of clinical presentations. Although by DAID's standards, we couldn't have ill patients initiating antiretroviral therapy, so there was a sort of screening out of the most ill patients. And it was in an era of D4T-based treatment, which needs to be acknowledged. But essentially across a wide category of treatment outcomes, nurses were demonstrated to be just as effective or non-inferior to doctors in terms of monitoring the average patient with antiretroviral therapy treatment. This study, plus a number of other initiatives, led to the shift, active task shifting, certainly in South Africa, to nurse-initiated treatment in primary healthcare. A massive expansion in capacity that led to over 3 million patients initiated on treatment. As part of the study, we looked at a differentiation by WHO category and by CD4 count, and again demonstrated that the earlier you start treatment, the better the outcomes. And it was particularly a virologic failure and incident TB, the two right Kaplan-Meier curves, that made the difference between these two CD4 count groups. In fact, that's the slide should be in a bit earlier. This is the more the treatment rollout occurs, the lower the population level viral load is, associated improvement in HIV incidence rates. So in parallel to the research unit, which continues to work actively with the ACTG on TB drug development at present, an evolution of Right to Care occurred, which is a non-profit group that actually has predominantly USAID funding. By PEPFAR's own numbers, South Africa, Kenya, and Uganda make up around 50% of the patients treated in the across the world utilizing PEPFAR support. And the current numbers of patients on treatment is just over 9 million. The PEPFAR global target for PEPFAR supported countries is 12.9 million, representing about a third increase in just the year 2017. Right to Care has evolved as an incredibly innovative space. And it is the overlap between innovation, research, innovation, and implementation that has made it possible to scale up not only in South Africa, but across a number of countries. Some of the innovations shown here is some human resources training and biometrics evaluation of staff attendance that has really honed people's attention to actually coming to work and doing their tasks on time, through interactions with TB Find on the development of Gene Expert, to many innovations around cervical cancer treatment that Cindy Fernhaber has led, to pharmacy automation, which is one of the most exciting components that we are undertaking at present. Our vision has been to provide innovations and high-quality care based on evidence medicine to our treatment sites. And we've done this across the fields of HIV and tuberculosis with an ever-expanding initiative that is summarized here, that includes from adult to pediatric treatment to interventions in tuberculosis prevention, biomedical prevention interventions with circumcision, and now more recently into pharmacy supply chain management. We have active programs in key populations, MSM, injection drug users, sex worker populations, and have actively moved into the South African Correctional Services facilities with a prisons program, an area that has previously been neglected, and we now have very active TB and HIV screening programs, including mobile X-ray machines that actually travel between prisons. The organization has grown from strength to strength, and I would like to, so some of this has been about business development. It is, I think, a case study in business development on its own. This is a comprehensive group that today has a turnover of 90% grant funded of $100 million per annum. With 10% from the private sector and private initiatives. It is a non-profit company that has a number of subsidiaries. We today have over 2,600 employees working in South Africa and outside of South Africa. We've recently divided up the business into a South African right to care, representing about half of the turnover, and an international right to care, which is led by Thembi as managing director, where the business grant-funded business turnover is growing rapidly. But we've also have a whole for-profit group, wholly owned by the non-profit group, that is focused in private sector initiatives, either Right Health, which is still has a mainly an employed sector focus, or the pharmacy automation business, or the software development and IP development business. Equip, where Thembi is chief of party, is a rapidly growing group. The top line here represents the principal recipient or principal partnerships. Partners in Hope will be known to you from UCLA's relationship with Malawi, to the academic partnerships formed with BU, UCLA, and Wits Pathology. The important components here, oops, sorry, that colors don't come out so nicely. The important components here is to advance the objectives of PEPFAR for the provision of test and start, to do with the correct interventions occurring at the right time, right place, and in the right way. These terms, by the way, were used by Ambassador Birks, but I think she probably stole them from our brand initiatives. But in essence, it is to support the WHO 1990 with a simplification of access to antiretroviral therapy through differentiated models of care. And some of this is about making not only an impact on the provision of care, but making it easier and more accessible to the average patient. Because the out-of-hospital costs for patients are becoming higher than the actual costs of the treatment program. So we essentially have some advantages. We're an African-based partner. We understand the setting. We've got some African solutions. Our indirect cost rate is probably about a quarter of UCLA's indirect cost rate, and so we would be potentially more efficient. We have a built-in health economics component, which enables the translation of our initiatives to all of these other governments that we're working with. And we have essentially an initiative or an approach that is slightly different to the US Beltway bandits, if I would call them that, and that is that we actually are quite willing to capacitate a local organization, and in the hope that they would win a grant award in 5 years' time, and we're quite happy to go home once we've capacitated that organization to its independence. So we bring on countries in a variety of ways. It's a negotiation between the Ministry of Health and USAID in country and USAID in Washington. We provide a bunch of technical assistance to USAID in country and then start identifying partners to work with. This is a list of countries that we're working in, and overnight, with some success, we have received substantive financial buy-in from a variety of countries out of their PEPFAR allocated funds. In many cases, it's unallocated or funds that have been unspent from the previous year that have become available for investment in novel, innovative initiatives. The spread of countries is wide, and perhaps this graphic shows a little better. Generally African countries, but we go as far as Myanmar and are working with the folks here at UCLA on a hepatitis C program in Myanmar. This is, I'm going to skip a couple of slides. So that's just a graphic of the funding growth line that is occurring in right to care at present. So the growth on average has been just about 27% per annum, and in the last year it's an over 100% growth or 56% growth. Okay, so I would like to focus a little bit of attention in the last couple of minutes on our pharmacy systems and data systems. So one of the initiatives that has been extremely successful is the evaluation of the central data warehouse that was established by the National Health Laboratory Services. All data from TB and HIV has been included since 2004 in a single database. We've developed the ability to follow longitudinal records through that data warehouse. At the beginning, there was around 78% matching of the longitudinal data record. With using neural network approaches to the database, we've been able to tie up around 86% of the data longitudinally. We've then been able to compare sites to our Tembelettic clinic cohort, where we know that there's a 100% match in terms of the lab data, and have been able to develop with 95% probability a monitoring evaluation record across each province, each district, and each site to demonstrate a variety of outcomes, either by CD4 count, by viral load, or by patient numbers on treatment. And these heat maps are now, I'm showing you the provincial ones, but they're basically available to at the district level and site level as well. And it is this initiative that we are taking with EQUIP out into Zambia, Malawi, and other countries to build central data warehouses and then have the ability from laboratory data to actually provide monitoring, evaluation, reporting. A very interesting and exciting development has been our pharmacy automation. At the beginning of this, the initiative was started because patient waiting queues in the pharmacy could be anything between 4 to 6 hours. And so our desire to actually automate pharmacies has led to a project co-funded by the German government and USAID to automate provincial hospital pharmacies. This technology is probably known to you and seen in the United States, but it is a first to actually do this in a South African setting. And so we have a contract with government for the maintenance and continuation of these automated facilities in hospitals. But a more exciting development and novel initiative, probably a worldwide first, is to actually move this automation technology into shopping centers in the more, although urban because of patient volumes, but in the public, to serve public health patients, public sector patients with chronic medicines. And so within this setting in Alexandra, which is an urban high-density population in Johannesburg, we have actually established in a shopping center ATMs or patient dispensing units, the front window of which can be seen here, with automation behind. And patients can come to these to receive their labeled, named patient drugs. It's made possible by having cloud scripting. So all scripts are set in the cloud, and the patient can actually go anywhere within the network to collect their medicines. We're working on a whole bunch of additional technologies. We had to deal with patient pre-pack sachets of drug. We've done chronic app or developed apps for adherence. We're looking at the post office setting to in fact have medicine collection lockers where patients can go up with a pre-defined code, go to a locker, put in the code and collect their medicines at the post office. And we're looking at high volume central dispensing units for Zambia and other settings. So to show you how this works, the best way is to do this with a short video.
We are 3 months into the year, and it's another day's leave that Emma has had to take to collect her medication. Her employer is losing patience, and frustration is building. For Emma, it seems that her life and days are spent queuing. She queues for the bus and taxi, her monthly shopping. She queues when she goes to the clinic. Getting a parcel from the post office is precious time wasted queuing. And now having to wait in this pharmacy queue is disheartening. For Tandy, queuing is a thing of the past.
I'm a very lucky lady because I'm registered to collect my medication from the new PDU, a brilliant new dispensing system that makes my life easier and saves me a lot of time. It's as easy as going to my ATM. I will have my medication dispensed within 5 minutes. Let me show you the process and how it works. I really feel for Emma. She has to go through this every time she needs to collect medication. I know from experience that she'll be sitting here for at least an hour, if not longer.
Tandy received her confirmation SMS 7 days ago, so that she could plan ahead and select a day that would be most convenient for collection. Before you can use the PDU service, you will have to register for the service and fulfill the criteria required to use the system. You will then be issued with a smart card, which is used together with your personal PIN number. Once you are registered, it is so easy. The first step is to take your normal PIN ID document or a smart card if you have been issued with one and insert it into the scanner. The scanner reads the barcode and allows you to enter your secret PIN number. Enter your personal PIN number using the keypad. By the way, if you have forgotten your PIN number, you can always go to the pharmacy window for assistance. There is also a toll-free number on your smart card that you can call for assistance. The screen displays all of your available prescriptions. So all you need to do is tap screen on the one you want and the prescription will open up. A light flashes when your medication is selected and deposited into the collection tray. You simply open the drawer and lift out your boxes of medication. The PDU will then issue a printed receipt with certain details such as the next collection date. Let's go back to where you selected your prescription. If you want to discuss any problems or side effects that you are experiencing with the medication, you are able to communicate in real time with a qualified pharmacist using an audio and video link straight from the PDU.
I'm going to go ahead and dispense.
In case you are wondering where this person is, well, She is based in a dedicated call center and as a qualified pharmacist can access information about your prescriptions and will know how to assist you. Let's take a closer look at how this innovative technology works behind the scenes. This is the way your medication is selected and put into the drawer.
It's that easy. As expected, it's only taken me 5 minutes, and now I'm off to work.
So you switch the lights on again. So we've been able to contract Department of Health to move over 200,000 patients from not just HIV patients, but also diabetics and hypertensive patients, chronic medication patients, from government clinics into these PDU sites at shopping centres. The first one will be launched this month, with a further 6 such facilities being built at present. The demand for this automation technology has been incredible, and in fact in Zambia is likely to be the next country that we would operate from. My last point is probably our most ambitious point, and that is that we would like to build a new medical school. It will be focused on primary health care. It is under the National Health Insurance initiatives of the National Department of Health, which means that we actually need to do not health finance components and work out where the funding is going to come from for new primary healthcare sites. We have to do the governance and contracting component with the Department of Health and eventually develop sites. And so in a very ambitious program, we are working essentially on developing a solution that is similar to what the English have in National Health Trust, but actually have a Wits University-led trust that is essentially becomes the conduit for funding to 3 pillars, 3 different businesses, one of them being a facility management and operations business on the left in grey, the second being the logistics business in green, and the third being the property and actual building of clinics business in yellow. In the logistics business, the development is to have a paperless clinic, fully integrated with pharmacy systems and with lab systems. And the ambition is that this would generate not only efficiency, but incredibly large data sets in terms of for evaluation. To actually do this, we purchased the first land and have moved with one of our drones to produce a film for you on where the first of these clinical sites will be. It is an urban setting in Johannesburg where 400,000 people have been given new homes and houses, some of quite good quality, which you can see in the upper left side of the screen, with no attention to healthcare services. So for 400,000 people, there is not a single clinic. And so there's this incredible gap in the marketplace that can be urgently addressed for the building of new clinics. We hope to have 50 of these clinics up and running within the next 3 to 5 years, and a new medical school built in the same time frame to open and accept students from 2019 onwards. This is the most exciting and ambitious project that we have taken on. In fact, some of the technologies that we develop here may end up becoming available through Equip in some of the other countries. So essentially, while you're watching the video of a industrial property about to be turned into a clinic, I think that is my last slide. And I would thank you for your attention and hope I've left a bit of time for questions.
That was perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so we do have time for questions for Ian. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Ian. That was phenomenal, and you've been a really tremendous leader in innovation. And if you were a U.S. citizen, I would write you in tomorrow for our election. So my question is, you did mention a lot about prevention, and right now in South Africa, it's about 1,000 new infections a day, 300,000 to 400,000 a year, 3 million new cases every 3 years. So with the treatment needs, that's going to be a continued, requirement. And you've nicely addressed how you can potentially go ahead and treat millions and millions of people. But what's your, vision for turning off the tap? I mean, how can we get, from 300,000 to 30,000 new infections a year? What's the strategy and plan there?
So the South African, so Right to Care by nature and the work that we've done up until now, by the nature that I'm an infectious diseases doctor, has been focused on treatment, and we've kind of focused on that end of the spectrum. In terms of biomedical interventions or interventions in prevention, we have, as a group, started moving into prevention activities. So the first was the circumcision consortium that we put together. So in an ambitious intent within South Africa to have more than 80% of men between the ages of 15 and 45 circumcised. The backlog was around 5 million circumcisions. Through a variety of partners and Department of Health activities, we have moved to doing about.
I am so sorry. I don't know what happened.
So Right to Care is doing 250,000 circumcisions a year. With USAID support in around 40 sites. So circumcision, certainly we're trying to scale up. Working with traditional circumcision has been very interesting. They're literally doing circumcisions at midnight under the stars and moon. And they do them standing together with the traditional leaders and the traditional healthcare workers. So essentially blanket as far as possible circumcision. I think the social mobilization and education campaigns are certainly rolling out and being successful. We're not very involved in that, except for a target group now in adolescents. So I'd like to try and package an adolescent prevention agenda. And I think that PrEP is successful for key pops, but in fact in adolescent girls we don't really have the data to support PrEP, but we are involved in the long-acting antiretroviral therapy studies, so injectable PrEP will hopefully become a reality. You're correct. Unfortunately, Right to Care is not necessarily the perfect vehicle for prevention activities, but we'd like to see prevention initiatives and a vaccine coming about. So South Africa is very involved in the vaccine clinical trials.
You mentioned in the beginning when you started, there weren't a lot of people interested in HIV, and it was seen as sort of not a good career. Has that changed in South Africa? Do you have a workforce coming up through the ranks?
So certainly we can attract very good people to Right to Care and into the research agenda. I think it has become part of a normal treatment career, normal career to treat HIV. I think it's an awesome disease to treat because you can bring somebody who's very ill back from being at death's door to being active and back and economically active. So I think the image has turned, and I think it's been antiretroviral therapy that has changed that image. I think in terms of research output from the medical school, I would think at WITS today, more than 50% of all publications are related to infectious diseases, either HIV or TB. Our ranking within the worldwide ranking has certainly risen in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's definitely a contribution has been made by the research initiatives on infectious diseases. So it's been a full turnaround. The cardiologists are now envious of the research abilities that we have.
That's great. Other questions? All right. Well, we have a couple days of visits from Ian and Tembe and John Hamilton, and thank you all for coming to hear Ian's talk today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. That was good.